Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I'm your host, Joe Mosier. As always, a quick reminder before today's episode, if you haven't done so already, now is a great time to subscribe to the podcast and ensure that you never miss any of the content or conversations that we publish here each week, all in service of helping you deliver better results in your agribusiness through better strategy execution. Today, I'm going to be sharing my conversation with Carrie Vollmer-Sanders, president of Field to Market, a 20-year-old nonprofit that brings together participants across the ag value chain to address agricultural sustainability challenges. Now, as I've said before, the amazing gift that I enjoy every day in the work that I do, and in the privilege of getting to do this podcast, is that I get to talk with really interesting people, have great, deep conversations on subjects, and I get the chance to discover and observe and highlight the lessons gleaned from one person, one business, and one context, and understand how they can be applied to others. And that's really part of the work that we do here. We're trying to aggregate lessons learned, aggregate perspectives, aggregate insights, all to help improve agribusiness execution. And there was a lot of that in my time here recently with Carrie. Now, I will say that this is, I believe, the first time we've had a nonprofit on, and so a little bit of a different type of an organization. But all those things held true, despite it being a nonprofit, despite it being a coalition-based organization, despite it not existing in one specific leg of the value chain, not having one specific commercial objectives. It's still rich in learnings, and there's a lot here for you today. One of the things that I walked away with, I think, was particularly impactful, and I think you might hear it as well, is just the challenges and the rewards of finding a way to effectively manage a wide coalition of collaborators, especially when that coalition has sometimes competing objectives and incentives. That is a huge problem to tackle. It's complex, it's sticky and nasty, but when you get it right, it unlocks a lot of value. It's not for the faint of heart, but if you can get it right, whether it's running a nonprofit, whether it's leading industry advocacy, whether it's leading an integration of two merged organizations, it is there. In the episode, though, we're also going to talk about some very real lessons for you as an agribusiness operator, or perhaps some reminders of important lessons that you've already learned in your career. You know, the power of confronting divergence of opinions to really get to the truth of the matter, right? You don't learn a whole lot when everyone agrees. You learn a whole lot when people disagree more than you anticipate. Kind of the net benefit of finding ways to get people together to aggregate their sentiment, and then to use that to learn something about the market, about your customers, about the opportunity that might not be available to others. Again, so confronting divergence of opinion, aggregating sentiment, and analyzing to think about, okay, what did we learn that we didn't know before? And then also just the power of stories, specifically stories that are illustrative examples of how really complex undertakings really show up in the real world. So moving past the big promises, the bold ambitions, the kind of ambiguous objectives that organizations have, and saying, here, let me show you specifically how this works. In this case today, how does this work with cotton growers in the United States? How does it work with Michigan wheat farmers that are looking to feed a Mondelez supply chain? Kind of the benefits of it, how it works, and how it comes to be. Thank you as always for being a listener, for being a member of the Pacesetter Pod community, and ultimately for being a leader in agribusiness that's taking a wide lens and thinking about how you can improve strategy execution in your agribusiness. With that, here's my conversation with Carrie Vollmer-Sanders, president of Field to Market. Carrie, welcome to the Pacesetter Pod.
Thanks so much, Joe. It's great to be here.
I am excited to talk to you today. Let's get right into Field to Market, an organization that you lead. It's a different profile of organization than we've highlighted on the show in the past, which is fun for me. So maybe can you talk to our listeners about what Field to Market is, what you all do, and kind of an overview of how you approach the market in terms of sectoral structure, et cetera?
Sure. So Field to Market's a nonprofit that was created about 20 years ago, initially because the question came up, what is sustainability? How do we define it? And then how do we measure that? So we're really an organization that's built upon trust throughout the ag value chain. And when I say throughout the ag value chain, we've got 5 different sectors that essentially help govern the organization. And those sectors are growers, agribusiness, civil society, something we call affiliate sectors, so like your researchers and government agencies, and then brands and retail. And they all have equal representation. So essentially an equal voice in what we do and how we do it. And we've got about 200 members that are in our organization, members of ours. And we really focus on collective action to help support resilient ecosystems and enhance farmer livelihoods.
Okay, very good. So I have to confess I missed the third one. So it was growers, agribusiness,
civil society, so like other nonprofits, like Ducks Unlimited, for example.
And then government agencies, governmental organizations, and brands and retail.
That's right.
Well, it's interesting to have so many different, both commercial as well as non-commercial sort of participants in that type of effort. Was that the original structure, or is that something that has evolved over time to be kind of that clear cut of here's the pillars of on how we define our membership and our perspectives to the issues?
It's a good question. We were started that way from the beginning. The thought process was, if you don't have farmers at the table, brands and brands and retail, then is it agribusiness talking to themselves? So, I mean, it was important to bring all the voices together, because if you're going to have collective action, you really need everybody to participate. And one of the things that we've focused on is to make sure that it's not just equal representation, but it's also equal voice. So we're not just listening to one sector over another. It really is equal across the field, which it does complicate things to some extent. Yeah.
You know, I'm looking at these 5 and thinking about the potential for diversity of opinion or the nuances of operations within each one of the sectoral pillars. I'm using the word pillars myself. You haven't actually used that, but brands and retail, there's a whole plethora of how they might operate, where they operate, the scope and scale of their operations, et cetera. But even at the growers, you talked about how important it is that the growers, the producers, the farmers have a seat at the table. Are you looking across, is it limited to sort of say production row crop ag? Are we in fruit and veg, forages? Sort of where's the boundaries around what is the profile of farmer that would be involved versus maybe this is not necessarily the most additive place for their involvement?
Sure. So it kind of comes back to the 3 things that we're really good at. So I bucket those into convene, create, and deliver. So we have a couple of events throughout the year. We bring people together in person. One of them is the largest sustainability conference in the U.S. focused on agriculture. That's Sustainable Ag Summit. All farmers are invited to that, regardless of what they produce. The focus is feed, fiber, fuel, and food, of course. The next piece that we work on is create, and that we have something called the Field Print platform so that farmers can help measure their sustainability impact. And that then looks at not just carbon, but 8 different metrics. So think like land use, irrigation, energy use, water quality, biodiversity, like soil conservation or erosion, and carbon. So that tool, that field print calculator, is on 17 different crops. And those crops range from, think about alfalfa, barley, corn, both corn for grain, corn for silage, your dry beans, cotton, soybeans, so peanuts, so your major commodity crops, but also, thinking about sugar beets and sorghum aren't top of mind necessarily for farmers. So it does allow for a lot of different types of farmers to get involved. And we're always looking for vegetables and like other crops that we could add in, but we need there to be demand for those crops in the calculator to add it in. And that last piece is the deliver piece, just real quick, Joe. And it is providing programs for farmers, for agribusinesses, for brands and retail, essentially to help make sure that those innovative solutions are put in place. And we're helping whether it's a farmer, an agribusiness, civil society, any of our members reach their sustainability goals.
And that's an area that we will dig into here in a bit, and some of the projects and the programs that you all have. We skipped right past, your background, Carrie, but, some folks listening could, when someone's leading a nonprofit, can make all sorts of assumptions around the individual with an axe to grind, the mission driven. Do they understand the demands of working in an agribusiness or working, at the farm gate? So maybe just a minute or two on your background, and also what you're doing when you're not leading field to market.
Sure. So I've worked my entire career kind of at the intersection of agriculture and conservation, and now agriculture and sustainability. So I grew up in Ohio on a hog farm, went to Michigan State and learned a lot about agriculture economics and environmental economics, worked at Michigan Farm Bureau, worked at the Nature Conservancy on the Great Lakes for a bit, and then across North America, focusing on their ag program before I came here to field to market. I also farm with my husband and my parents. So we farm in Northeast Indiana, Northwest Ohio. Your basic crops, corn, soybeans, and wheat. And a couple of years ago, I joined the board at our local ag co-op, Eden Farmers Co-op. And it's been very interesting understanding the ins and outs of what an elevator can do and how they operate and what they can do to get involved with sustainability programs. I
wanted to ask about that too, because I think clearly leading a coalition of folks that are participating in and very closely related within a supply chain, the sectors that you talked about. Leading that coalition is rewarding, I'm sure, challenging, because they're also sometimes in opposition to one another. They have competing demands or diverging incentives, but I think it's also interesting and worth calling out that you live in the shoes of at least two of those sectors. Being on the board of a co-op allows you to look at it through the lens of an agribusiness and what they're trying to accomplish and some of the constraints and opportunities that they confront when it comes to conservation and sustainability, but then also actively farming production, row crop ag is a good perspective. It's not a tabletop theoretical exercise in the boardroom. It's something that's felt and real.
Right. So I've often said I'm not a computer conservationist. I'm someone that actually uses the pencil and drives the combine to help make feed actually. And it definitely is humbling when you understand the whole ag value chain, like what is going on with for farmers this year. So I'm not going into a meeting talking only about sustainability without the understanding that labor is a huge issue, tariffs are a huge issue, input costs are a huge issue. So understanding that complexity, I think, is helpful when you're working with the whole value chain, but also just when you understand all of the things that are going on in a farmer's life right this year in particular.
Certainly. I think that's a good segue. I think we could look back at any period of time, and if you talk to people in your position or similar positions about what's happening within the economy, what's happening within the industry, what's happening within the organizations and the operating conditions, everyone would say there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of challenges. There's things we need to work through. There's opportunities, et cetera. That being said, it also feels like it's amplified and magnified, and particularly the volume is way up right now. And so I know that earlier this summer, you all held your annual meeting. And I did not attend. I have not attended that in the past, but I understand that a part of that is actually having sectoral report outs where folks that represent those different groups get to talk about what they're observing, what they're experiencing, what is working, what's not working, what ambiguity they need help with, et cetera. And as we're in this time where sustainability is still seemingly a safe word to use, though you don't always want to refer to something as being climate smart, or there's other sort of things you need to be more careful with, let's say. I would love to understand from that summer, the annual meeting, what you heard from your membership, particularly agribusiness.
Sure.
Given that that's our audience.
Yep.
But I think it's also relevant, if there's any highlights from what you heard from the grower and the retail brand segments as well. What struck you? What comes to mind? What was sort of the headlines coming out of that, to the extent that you can share?
Sure. Well, I would say first and foremost, the moods of each of the sectors were similar in that there was straddling hope and uncertainty. There was optimism yet concern. And so each of the sectors kind of talked through what that meant for their own sector. When you have uncertainty, that can lead to mistrust. And one of the things our organization is known for is building trust within the whole ag value chain. So I think in some ways, getting together and talking through some of the difficulties, some of the challenges, and quite honestly, what people are excited about, it does help continue to build the trust and make sure that there's an understanding a bit about what's happening. Some of the things that the agribusinesses talked about, essentially the economics of farming this year, limited workforce, and that was shared by not just the agribusinesses, but some of the farmer comments connected to that. There was also this sentiment that brands and retail wanted to get to the farm. They wanted to get on the ground and talk with farmers. And just coordination among the sectors was mentioned a couple of times. That being said, one of the things that the agribusinesses thought that they could maybe help with is bringing the two ends together. So when we think about the ag value chain, it's the growers and the brands and retail, and the agribusinesses play such a huge role in that. It's an easy picture to think about how the retailers kind of are that chain that connects the two ends. So they need to, that's something that they were going to focus on a little bit more. And we have this field platform. There was a lot of optimism in the updates that we're coming out with, primarily so the brands and retail and some agribusinesses that have global goals can meet those global goals a little bit easier. So the platform has some updates that will make that alignment with global sustainability goals more simple for them.
Thank you for that. Something you just mentioned is the idea of the brands and retail expressing a desire to get on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
And close to the farm. I could speculate or make a lot of assumptions around why that might be, but was there sort of driving objectives around why that would be desirable to them, what they hope to accomplish? Is it to form partnerships? Is it to simply learn? Is it to, if I take my most skeptical view, to virtue signal and get some good on-farm pictures that can go on the back of a box? I don't actually believe that that's the case, but what are they trying to accomplish via that desire to get on the farm?
I think it's understanding in the purest of sense. What are the difficulties with, people talk about if a farmer is growing something sustainably, it costs more to make that happen. Or potentially you have to change the system. And just like folks can read about all of this online, sometimes it's helpful just to talk with a farmer to better understand what it really is like going through that, to hear it from a farmer firsthand. And the agribusinesses are the ones that have those relationships with the farmers. So in some ways, easier to work through that connection than to a brand and retailer trying to find a farmer on their own.
We had a guest on here recently. The thrust of the argument that he was making is that in our system that we have built, in our agricultural supply and value chains that we have built, we have taken production ag and continued to reiterate it as a commodity rather than as an ingredient. And so when you produce wheat in central Kansas, for example, that gets commingled and commodified. It ultimately then gets aggregated by, the grain handler. It then at some point is shuttled to a flour miller, who then changes the form and function of that. It then is sold as at that point, it becomes an ingredient form. It's been massaged into an ingredient, at which point it's then sold along with a variety of other chemical additives and sort of wonders of science to a commercial baker, right, to produce the loaf of bread. And their argument is really, we have the potential to trust production ag, not science, with some of these solutions. And through better genetics, agronomy, et cetera, might we not be able to provide wheat that is more ingredient ready versus a commodity profile to those end users? And the reason I bring that up is because in articulating that problem to be solved, he highlighted how many steps there are between that producer and the people that are ultimately producing it's a commercial bakery. And so sometimes I wonder if actually having the two ends of that spectrum get together on the farm is enough, or if you need the intermediaries along the way to be involved. And I guess you've kind of highlighted that as the agribusinesses have those relationships, because there's a lot of incentives along the way to preserve things the way they are. There's a lot of margin. There's a lot of infrastructure investments that have been made. There's a lot of momentum and inertia in the businesses. And there's a lot of trust. And as imperfect as the supply chain is, it is working as we designed it to. And so I don't know there's a question there for you, Carrie, other than I think it's interesting when these two ends of the spectrum want to get together to learn. And I wonder if we don't need more parties involved in those conversations to make them actually as beneficial as possible.
That's a really great point. And fascinating when you stop and think about how our grain gets to the mouths of people or animals, or, even create fuel, right? It's just so fascinating the way things have been created along the way, and to a system that in many cases works really, really well. One of the things that we have done over the years is we've created something called a cross-sector dialogue. So we had one at our annual meeting not too long ago, and the focus was on feed, quite honestly. So feed can mean both feed for animals or feed for pets. So shouldn't think just livestock. But that conversation was really so much more rich because we had each of the sectors kind of talked amongst themselves about what it was the challenges were they were seeing throughout the whole value chain. And then we curated the tables in such a way that someone from each of the sectors were at each of the tables so that they could then bring that sector perspective and their own to the conversation, so that when we looked at sustainable feed, the conversations were so much deeper than if we had just had two of the sectors there, right? And the agribusiness sector, I should say, is our largest sector by far because there's so many pieces of the ag value chain in that sector. So it's not just the co-op, it's not just the elevators, not just the processors or the millers, but it's like everyone kind of in between. So there's a lot of entities, a lot of companies that make up that agribusiness sector for us.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
No, it certainly is. It's one of the things that's perhaps most vexing and most fascinating about the industry that we're in is, sometimes I sit back and look at it and people can levy criticisms, and sometimes they're informed and sometimes they're based on assumptions and ignorance. It's kind of amazing that it works as well as it does as often as it does.
Right.
You think about things like war, significant weather events, the pandemic, and that's just scratching the surface. The number of different opportunities for dislocation of supply and demand, opportunities for the system which takes grain from times and places of surplus to times and places of deficit, for that to get blown apart and not work. And I'm not saying that it works perfectly and that we have equally distributed, caloric availability around the world. We clearly don't. But it's this complex system full of ostensibly nasty middlemen. But all of them generally have an additive role in what it is that we do.
One of the things that we need to do at Field to Market is to make sure that we are not breaking that ag value chain, that we are innovating and helping make that ag value chain stronger by building trust amongst the partners in there. If someone wants to measure their carbon footprint or environmental footprint, we can help them do that in a way that everybody agrees. If they want to put a project together to help connect the customer that is ultimately buying the food with the farmer, we can help make that happen. You can't do that in a vacuum. You have to do that by getting together, talking together, again, bringing those two ends together with the agribusinesses, and sometimes making the introductions. And sometimes it's an organization like our civil society, like Ducks Unlimited, helping make that connection too. It's not just the agribusinesses. I think that's one of the reasons why having each of those 5 sectors is really important for us.
Yeah, and a question I have about that sort of occurred to me as you're talking here the last few minutes. A brief aside. A lot of the work that we do is around helping organizations through a merger and acquisition, particularly around the post-merger integration piece. And in that experience, leaders are stretched and challenged and pressure tested in ways that they might not have ever been before. Because you've got so many people that are dealing with uncertainty, which have their own set of assumptions. They perceive some things as risks or opportunities. They have different incentives, etc. Right? And oftentimes in that M&A integration process, it can feel like there's winners and losers.
Yeah.
Either you got to keep the process you have, or you have to learn a new process. You get to keep the relationships that were assigned to you, or now you have a new territory. There's a series of trade-offs. One of the things I perceive as a strength of field to market is the diversity of your membership and the profile and the roles that they play along that value chain. That strength is also, I imagine, a really challenge. I'm going to go back to that word coalition I mentioned earlier. That's a tough coalition because it's so broad and so diverse. So I guess my question here, reflecting on your own leadership journey, what have you learned about the couple of things that one must do, or perhaps the things that one must not do, to effectively harness that diversity and have a productively operating coalition?
Mm-hmm.
You know, most of our listeners are not going to probably find themselves in the role that you're in or doing that exact kind of work, but there's some parallels. And I think it'd just be interesting to hear how have you tackled and how have you found success in coalition building and leading?
Well, that's a very interesting question. As I think about mergers and acquisitions, the bottom line, what's important, communication, right? And figuring out the margin for each of the areas of the business. Or in some cases, it's thinking about what it is that is the focus of the conversation, merger, acquisition, new project, thinking about sustainability, but looking at it from the view of the other partner, the other organization, and making sure that there's value for everyone all down the line. Like when we're putting projects together or working with organizations that have projects, one of the things that's really interesting is to understand what's the value for the brand and retail, what's the value for the agribusiness, what's the value for the farmer. And if they all find value, then it's easy. Drop the mic, move on, right? Mm-hmm. It's only a one-way street. That's when it doesn't work nearly as well. And then the communications break down, and then maybe that collaboration isn't going to work nearly as well as we think it does. And I think that's why our organization has been around as long as it has, is because we are focused on getting input from each of the sectors and trying to make sure that it's essentially as equal as it can be when sharing that information out or when putting together the definitions, whether it's on sustainability, regenerative agriculture, the metrics for deciding how to measure water quantity. What's the best way to do that? We don't do that in a void. We make sure that we do that with our members.
Yes, there's a lot of wisdom there. The idea of communicating from the objective back, what are we trying to accomplish? Understanding intimately how others perceive the value that they either stand to lose or hope to gain, and not making assumptions or presumptions around, well, this is additive for us, so surely the counterparty or the other partner in the chain will see this as a benefit as well. I think when you start to skip past that, the diligence of saying, the reason that we've wanted to do this is that XYZ really drives value for our customers and our customer relationships. Does that hold true for your business?
Mm-hmm.
asking that question.
Right.
And being willing to get an answer that you might not want, that actually complicates things for you.
Mm-hmm.
It could slow things down, but as I say, go slow to go fast. It's really necessary. You mentioned some of the projects, and I'd like to talk about that for a few minutes. Solely from my seat, sometimes when I've, in my corporate career, watched presentations from NGOs or from high-profile nonprofits that were mission-driven, and they would have some really compelling stories to share, some really good branding around what they're trying to do, making some bold promises, things that are energizing, but I would often walk away still unclear on exactly what do they do exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I think the field to print solution, and for folks that go to the website, they'll start to be able to see exactly how that works as a service offering. But you talk about these projects,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is kind of that of the convene, create, deliver sort of paradigm. This is part of the deliver leg. Can you maybe share some of the real life examples of projects and collaborations to help us put some sharp corners on how the work you do illustrates the benefit to the members and helping them accomplish their goals?
Sure. And we have all of the projects that are using the FieldPrint platform are registered and on our website. So you can dig in more. One of them that I love talking about is in Michigan, there's a co-op elevator, and they have a project with Mondelez. And the project started out originally back in 2016 as a research project with Michigan State University. And the focus initially is a little bit different than what it is now. And that's one of the great things about all the projects, right? They can align on goals initially, they test it out, and then they can adjust. And that's kind of what had happened in this project. In 2021, they switched the data they were collecting a little bit, and now they focus on just the wheat that's used to go into, Mondelez has Triscuits. That's the brand that we're focused on in Michigan. And that Triscuit is produced from 25,000 acres that Michigan Co-op Elevator helps deliver to Mondelez. The co-op elevator helps the farmer fill out all the data, right? So there is data that's collected within that field print calculator. It has to be entered every year, and that's shared with Mondelez. And on the Triscuit package, it talks about the Michigan farmers and the importance of what they're doing for the environment, for the land. But it's not just that it's a Mondelez benefit. The co-op elevator is benefiting. They're offering more agronomy services, more advice to the farmers. The farmers are getting a little bit of higher payment per acre that the co-op elevator facilitates. But the next thing that co-op elevator did is they've kind of iterated again. They're adjusting again. So they're then looking at what else is in this crop rotation that the farmers have if they're planting wheat. Where else could we bring value back to the farmers? So they're now putting in place a black bean project with another one of their buyers to try to get more funding back to the farmers, but also collecting that data and sharing that data with the brand. So it's pretty interesting the way it started and the way it's evolved over the last almost 10 years.
No, I like that. I mean, not necessarily the point of the story, but sometimes these large scale efforts, I mean, so much of it does come down to data that is high quality, that is standardized, but that ultimately must be collected.
Right.
Especially in a highly fragmented farm gate system with individual producers of variable size. The burden of data collection falling on those folks can often be where it all starts to fall apart, whether it's in governmental programs, whether it's in, nonprofit collaborations like this, whether it's in other types of corporate partnerships. And so not just looking at how do we connect the growers to the retail brand to be able to serve the objectives of what the customers ultimately want in that box of Triscuits, but also saying, okay, how do we as a supply chain partners look to maybe it's consolidate all of that data reporting and aggregation at a point in the chain where it's feasible to do so. right? So there's always those times where there's certain organizations that are better equipped to comply and compete for certain types of programs because they have the size and the scale that allows them the resources to be able to dedicate focus to it, to standardize it, to make it efficient, and to get it done. And that's, I think, probably just a byproduct of the fact that you build these relationships between the co-op elevator company and the producers to say, look, we can also help you focus on what you do.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
We're going to facilitate the data collection, the compilation, and the aggregation by which we then now can pay those higher premiums per acre, per bushel, per whatever the unit is. We can then get your production into this value chain that is tightly controlled and has, high walls on it. And so I think that's also, there's a lot of operational learnings along the way when you bring these kinds of groups together.
Exactly. And data is always going to be at the center of that. That helps in some ways with the trust throughout the chain. And so when we can use that same data or on that same field and just add more data to the next crop rotation, makes it a little bit easier for the farmer. So it's not overwhelming. The co-op elevator can help make that, a value add to the grower, to their members. So it's, again, we have to look for those win-wins and that little bit of margin for everyone involved.
Certainly.
That's what we're hoping to do. Another project that's really pretty awesome is the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. And that is a group of the cotton growers, the cotton processing, essentially the cotton industry has gotten together and they work with an organization called the Seam. And the Seam is the one that is the data collector. But there's 40 different partners that help do, in some ways, the same thing that the co-op elevator does for the wheat and black bean growers. They collect the cotton, they help collect the data that is required, and then they are looking for that end buyer, whether it's Gildan. Sometimes you think about T-ball t-shirts, the Gildan company, or Target. They are then buying the cotton to use in their own projects, their own products. And it's pretty interesting. Again, they have adjusted a little bit over the years, but it's that same margin. They're looking to give those farmers more agronomy advice, a little bit of financial incentive. And the Cotton Trust Protocol, because they've been around so long and they have collected the data over the course of the last 5 years, they're now able to make impact claims. And they're on about 500,000 acres. So it's a little bit larger project than what's happening with the wheat and Triscuits, but they've got 1,300 growers involved on that 500,000 acres. And they're all collecting this data. Talk about a complex system that's been, tried to simplify it for the growers. There's a lot of help to get that data in to the FieldPrint platform and get that data then to those end users so that they can know that they're buying cotton that has a lower water footprint or using less energy. So it's pretty interesting when you look at the trend and look at how the Cotton Trust Protocol has grown and the impact that they're making.
Well, I think that's a perfect example, the counterpoint to my sort of preamble of saying, folks that advertise bold ambitions and cannot demonstrate a lot of specific or clearly defined action. 1,300 growers on over 500,000 acres working together to now be able to make credible, I focus on credible,
exactly.
Credible impact claims.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you believe climate change is a man-made risk or even a risk at all, whether you are on the sustainability journey, opposing it, learning about it, staying sustainability curious, wherever you are in that, still the idea that you can get 1,300 growers on 500,000 acres to be able to work together to be able to produce something that is credibly defensible, demonstrating a different type of outcome, I think it shows the power of an effective coalition of people working together. So I congratulate you on that success, Carrie.
Well, it's not me. We just have great organizations, great members, and whether it's Michigan Co-op Elevator or the Cotton Trust Protocol, they do a great job of working with the farmers and the end users. So it's like our job is to help make that chain stronger. And I think this is one way that we can do that is through our projects.
Well, I think it's a great place for us to start to wrap things up today. I very much personally appreciate a perspective of, I think, as you said it earlier, we don't break the chain, we make it stronger. And you've demonstrated that a couple of different ways. Again, this complex, imperfect, but incredibly reliable system that we have is truly remarkable. And so I would never say that it's not without opportunities to improve, but I certainly think we need to be careful before we simply throw elements of it out. We may find that it's harder to recreate it once it's gone versus the amount of trust and collaboration and participation that we have today. With that said, what's next for Field to Market? What's the next thing you all are looking to tackle? And what can we expect to hear about going forward?
So we're going to be launching the Field Print platform version 5.0 here in the next couple of months. And that will have some new features that's easier for the farmer and I think better for the brand for reporting. We are working on sustainability leadership programming. We do a lot in the innovative finance space and have realized that we need to keep learning, and folks in those areas need to keep learning. So we're going to be providing some additional information for them, ways to grow personally and professionally. And we're going to keep focusing on partnerships. I think sustainability, agriculture, farming, it's a hard thing to do on your own. So working together and helping build those collaborations is something we're going to continue to work on. Our events in November, I really would encourage folks to take a look at. We've got our member meeting just ahead of the Sustainable Ag Summit, which again is the largest agricultural focused sustainability conference in the country. This year it happens to be in Anaheim, California.
Which is usually an easier sell for many, depending on the time of year.
Right.
Well, we will make sure certainly that we have links to all of that in the show notes. And Carrie, like I said at the outset, this is a very different type of organization and program that we've highlighted in the past. But I think there's a lot of good lessons here for the legacy brick and mortar agribusiness operators that are listening in. One, it's good education on what else is out there and what resources might be available and other things to look at. But even just some of the lessons around how do you manage a coalition? How do you drive change? How do you deal with some of the challenges of along your value chain and your partnership chain, folks that have more or less sort of maturity of process, more or less resources, and how do you kind of balance that for mutual benefit? So I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to join us in the Pacesetter Pod.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And for all of our listeners, thank you as always for tuning into today's episode. I hope that you found something not just of interest, but of actionable value in our conversation today. And if you did, I ask you to please consider sharing this episode with someone that you think would find similar benefit. It is the very best way that you can support the show and help us elevate thinking around strategy execution all across the ag supply chain. Thanks again for joining. I look forward to having you right here next time on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.